I haven't been camping in 6 years. Not because I don't like the outdoors anymore, or because I got too busy with work, or any of those normal reasons people stop doing things they used to love. I stopped because the last time I went camping, something happened that I still can't explain, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. It was late September 2019. I was 27, working a dead-end IT job in Portland, Oregon, and I needed a break from everything. My girlfriend and I had just broken up after 3 years together. I was living in a studio apartment that smelled like the Thai restaurant downstairs, and I was in one of those moods where you just need to get away from people for a while. You know that feeling, where everyone and everything just grates on you. So I decided to do a solo camping trip. I'd been camping plenty of times before with friends, with ex-girlfriends, with my dad when I was a kid, but I'd never gone alone, and something about that appealed to me. Just me, my tent, some books, and complete silence. No small talk, no compromises about where to set up camp or what to eat. Just solitude. I chose a spot out in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, about 2 hours northeast of Portland. There's this area near Dark Meadow that's not heavily trafficked, because the trailhead is kind of a pain to get to, and I wanted to avoid the weekend warrior crowd. I'd read about it on some hiking forum where people shared hidden spots, and it seemed perfect. Remote, quiet, and supposedly beautiful this time of the year when the leaves were changing. I left on a Friday afternoon, took a half day from work, loaded up my beat-up Honda Civic with my gear. I remember stopping at a gas station in Trout Lake to fill up and grab some beef jerky and trail mix. The woman behind the counter was probably in her 60s, had that weathered look that people get when they've outlived their whole lives in small mountain towns. She made small talk while ringing me up, asked where I was headed. Dark Meadow area, I said, planning to camp for the weekend. Something flickered across her face. Not quite concern, but something. She paused for just a second before putting my change on the counter. That's pretty remote, she said. You go in alone. Yeah, I said, maybe a little defensive. I was used to people treating solo camping like it was this crazy risky thing. I've camped before. I know what I'm doing. She nodded slowly. I'm sure you do. Just, weather's supposed to turn tonight. Gets cold up there, and it's real easy to get turned around in those woods, especially if you're not familiar with them. I thanked her and told her I'd be careful. Figured she was just being protective, the way small town people sometimes are. Looking back now, I wonder if she knew something, if she'd heard stories about that area. I never got the chance to ask her. The drive from Trout Lake to the trailhead took another 40 minutes on progressively worse roads. The last 3 miles were barely more than a dirt track with potholes that made my Civic's suspension scream. I passed exactly 2 other vehicles the entire way, both heading in the opposite direction, away from the forest. I parked at the trailhead around 4:30 in the afternoon. The parking area was just a small clearing that could maybe fit 5 or 6 cars, and mine was the only one there. The forest pressed in close on all sides, tall Douglas firs and western hemlocks that blocked out a lot of the late afternoon sun. It was quiet, really quiet. No bird sounds, no wind rustling leaves, just silence. I hoisted my backpack on, locked the car, and started hiking. The trail was well marked at first, little blue blazes on the trees every 100 feet or so. The plan was to hike about 3 miles, in to a clearing near Dark Creek, where I'd seen photos online. It was supposed to be this perfect little spot, with a view of the creek and enough flat ground for a tent. The hike was pleasant enough. My legs felt good, the pack wasn't too heavy, and despite the silence, the forest was beautiful in that moody Pacific Northwest way. Everything was green and slightly damp, with moss covering the fallen logs and tree trunks. The air smelled like pine and earth, and that specific wet forest smell that I've never been able to describe properly. I reached the clearing around 6 o'clock, just as the light was starting to fade, and it was perfect. Exactly like the photos. A roughly circular clearing, maybe 50 feet across, with Dark Creek burbling along one edge. The sound of the water was soothing after the eerie silence of the hike. I could see where previous campers had set up, little indentations in the ground where tent stakes had been driven in, a fire ring made of stones. I set up my tent on the far side of the clearing, away from the creek. I've always liked having a water source nearby, but not so close that you hear it all night when you're trying to sleep. Got my sleeping bag laid out, organised my food, and hung my bear bag from a tree branch like you're supposed to. By the time I finished, it was almost dark. I made a small fire, ate a couple of protein bars and some of that trail mix, and just sat there listening to the creek and watching the flames. It was exactly what I needed. No phone service, no internet, no people. Just me and the woods and the night. That's when I started to relax, really relax, for the first time in months. The tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders started to ease. I found myself just breathing, deep slow breaths of that cold mountain air. The temperature had dropped significantly once the sun went down, probably into the low 40s, and I'd put on my fleece jacket and beanie. I stayed by the fire until about 10, then kicked dirt over the embers and climbed into my tent. I'd brought a book, some Stephen King paperback I'd been meaning to read, but I was tired from the hike and the fresh air. I read maybe 10 pages before my eyes started getting heavy. I turned off my headlamp and lay there in the darkness, listening. The creek was a constant gentle sound, and somewhere far off I could hear what might have been an owl. But otherwise, silence, complete silence. In the city, you never get that. There's always traffic, sirens, the neighbours upstairs, the hum of your refrigerator. Here, there was nothing. I fell asleep quickly. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. My phone was dead. Had been since earlier in the evening, since there was no signal anyway, and I'd forgotten to charge it fully before leaving. But it was still full dark outside. That absolute blackness you only get in the wilderness, miles from any light pollution. I woke up because I heard something. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. A voice, distant, muffled by the tent fabric and the darkness. I lay there, groggy, trying to figure out if I'd actually heard it or imagined it. Then I heard it again. Someone was calling out. The voice was faint, coming from somewhere in the woods beyond my campsite. I couldn't make out words, just the rise and fall of someone yelling, like they were trying to get someone's attention. My first thought was that someone was lost. Maybe another camper who'd gotten turned around in the dark. Or someone injured who needed help. I felt a spike of adrenaline, that instant alertness that comes when you think someone might be in trouble. I unzipped my sleeping bag and found my headlamp, fumbled it on. The red night vision mode seemed too dim, so I switched it to the regular white beam. I could see my breath fogging in the light. It had gotten really cold. I listened again. The voice called out once more, still distant, still unintelligible. It was coming from the woods to the north, opposite the direction I'd hiked in from. I put on my boots without lacing them up all the way, pulled on my jacket and unzipped the tent. The cold hit me immediately, much colder than when I'd gone to sleep. My headlamp beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the clearing. Everything looked different at night, the trees looming taller, the shadows deeper. "Hello?" I called out. "Do you need help?" My voice sounded small and flat in the darkness, like the forest just swallowed it up. No echo, no carry, just dead air. I waited, listened. The voice came again, and this time I could almost make out a word. It sounded like "here," or maybe "help." It was hard to tell. I grabbed my flashlight, the bigger one I'd brought for emergencies, and stepped out of my tent. My legs felt shaky, partly from the sudden wake-up, partly from the cold, partly from something else I couldn't quite identify. A nervousness maybe, something about the situation felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "I'm coming!" I yelled in the direction of the voice. "Keep making noise so I can find you." I started walking toward the tree line, my headlamp and flashlight both pointing ahead. The clearing felt much bigger at night, and it took longer than expected to reach the edge. As I got closer to the trees, the darkness seemed to get thicker somehow, like my lights weren't penetrating as far as they should. The voice called out again, clearer this time. "Over here." And that's when something in my brain finally processed what I was hearing, something that made my blood go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. The voice sounded familiar. Not familiar like a friend or family member. Familiar like me. It sounded like my voice. I stopped walking. My hand holding the flashlight started to shake a little. I had to be wrong. It was just the acoustics of the forest, or my brain playing tricks on me because I'd been woken up suddenly, or the fact that I'd been alone all day and maybe my mind was starting to do weird things in the isolation. "Hello?" I called out again, and I listened very carefully this time to the sound of my own voice, trying to memorize its tone and pitch. There was a pause, maybe 15 seconds, long enough that I started to convince myself I'd imagined the similarity, that it was just paranoia. Then the voice in the woods called back, "Hello!" And it was definitely my voice. Not similar, not kind of like mine. It was my voice, exactly my voice, with the same slight hoarseness I always have, the same northwest accent, the same inflection. It was like listening to a recording of myself. I felt my stomach drop, my throat went tight. Every rational explanation I'd been constructing for the past few minutes just evaporated. "Who's there?" I yelled, and I hated how my voice cracked a little on the last word. The response came quicker this time. "Who's there?" Same inflection, same crack in the voice. It was repeating me. Whatever it was out there in the darkness, it was repeating exactly what I said in exactly my voice. I backed up a few steps, my light sweeping across the tree line. I couldn't see anything, just trees and darkness and more trees. But something was out there, something that could sound exactly like me. My mind raced through possibilities. A person doing an impression? But how would they know what I sounded like? I'd been alone since arriving, some kind of bird, maybe a mimic, but it was too perfect, too exact, and I didn't know of any birds that could replicate human speech that precisely. I kept backing up toward my tent, not turning around, keeping my lights pointed at the woods. My heart was hammering now, that fight or flight response kicking in full force. "What do you want?" I called out, immediately regretting it. Silence, 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then from the darkness, "What do you want?" But this time it was closer, definitely closer, maybe 50 feet into the woods instead of 100. And the tone was slightly different, not questioning like mine had been, but flat, emotionless, like something that understood the words, but not the meaning behind them. I made a decision. I turned and ran to my tent, stumbling a little in my unlaced boots. I grabbed the tent flap, started to climb inside, then stopped. If something was out there, being trapped in a thin nylon tent suddenly seemed like the stupidest possible option. I turned back around, both lights pointed at the woods, breathing hard. Nothing, just silence and darkness and trees. I don't know how long I stood there. My arms started to ache from holding the lights up, and I was shaking from cold and fear. But I couldn't bring myself to move, couldn't decide what to do. Part of me wanted to pack up everything and hike out in the dark, but the rational part of my brain knew that was dangerous. The trail was barely visible in daylight, and it would be way too easy to get lost or injured trying to navigate it with just a headlamp. The other option was to stay, to wait it out until morning, 6, maybe 7 hours until dawn. I could build up the fire, stay awake, stay alert. Whatever was out there, fire was supposed to keep animals away, right? And if it was a person fucking with me, they'd probably get bored and leave. But what if it wasn't an animal or person? I pushed that thought away. There had to be a rational explanation. There was always a rational explanation. I decided to rebuild the fire. Moving around gave me something to do with my hands, something to focus on besides the darkness and the fear. I gathered some of the wood I'd collected earlier, got the fire going again. The flames pushed back the darkness a little, created a circle of warmth and light that felt safe. I sat down next to the fire, close enough that the heat made my face uncomfortable, and I kept my flashlight in my lap and my eyes on the tree line. Minutes crawled by, 10, 20, 30. Nothing happened. No voices, no sounds besides the creak and the crackling of the fire. I started to relax a tiny bit, started to convince myself that whatever it was had moved on, that I had scared it away, that maybe it had all been some weird acoustic phenomenon I didn't understand. Then I heard footsteps. Not in the woods this time, behind me, on the other side of the clearing, near where the trail came in. I spun around, flashlight up, and there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows and the darkness beyond my fire's light. But I'd heard it. I was sure I'd heard it. The soft crunch of boots on the dirt and pine needles. Maybe 3 or 4 steps before they stopped. "I know you're there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't funny. Whatever you're doing, just stop." No response. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, back and forth, looking for any reflection of eyes, any movement. Nothing. I turned back to face the fire, but I kept glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The clearing suddenly felt very exposed, like I was in a fishbowl and something was circling outside, just out of sight. Then I heard my own voice again, but this time it came from a different direction, from the east, near the creek. "I know you're there." The exact same words I'd just said, the exact same inflection, but there was something wrong with the timing, like it had been delayed by a few seconds, like a recording being played back. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight and headlamp, and pointed them toward the creek. The beam caught the water, making it sparkle, but beyond that, I could only see trees and undergrowth and darkness. "This isn't funny," came my voice from near the creek. Then a second later, from back in the woods to the north, "Whatever you're doing, just stop." My own words, spoken in my own voice, coming from two different directions. I felt dizzy. The fear was transitioning into something else, something worse, a kind of unreality, like my brain couldn't process what was happening and was starting to reject the whole situation. I made myself take deep breaths, in through my nose, out through my mouth, count to 4 on each breath. It's a technique my therapist had taught me years ago for managing anxiety, and right now I needed it. "Think," I told myself. "Think rationally. There has to be an explanation. Could it be some kind of speakers? Like someone had set up hidden speakers in the woods as a prank. But how would they have known I was coming here? And how would they have recorded my voice? Could it be some kind of animal I didn't know about? Some species that could mimic sounds perfectly? But I'd never heard of anything like that in the Pacific Northwest. Could I be hallucinating? Maybe I'd gotten carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire. Or maybe there was something in the water I'd filtered earlier. Or maybe I was just losing my mind. None of those explanations felt right, but neither did the alternative that my brain kept trying to suggest, that something impossible was happening. I sat back down by the fire, pulled my knees up to my chest, and kept my lights pointed outward, sweeping them across the tree line every few seconds. I decided I would wait for dawn, then pack up and get the hell out of here. 6 hours. I could stay awake for 6 hours. For a while, nothing happened. The fire burned down, and I added more wood. My water bottle was in the tent, and I realised I was thirsty, but I didn't want to turn my back on the clearing to get it. The cold was seeping into my bones despite the fire, and my fingers were getting numb. Then I heard singing. It was my voice. Definitely my voice, but I wasn't singing. The sound came from the woods to the west, near where the trail was. It wasn't any song I recognised, just wordless humming and melodic sounds, but it was definitely me making them. The singing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Then it started again, this time from the north. The same melody, the same humming, like something was circling around the clearing, staying just out of sight in the trees. The singing moved, north to east, east to south, south to west, back to north, circling the entire clearing, always in the trees, always just beyond where my light could reach clearly. I stood up again, turning slowly to track the sound, and that's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The singing was coming from multiple directions at once now. 2 voices, both mine, singing the same melody, but slightly out of sync. Then 3 voices, then 4. It sounded like a chorus of me, surrounding the clearing, hidden in the darkness. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I just stood there, frozen, listening to my own voice multiplied and echoing around me. Then, all at once, the singing stopped. Complete silence. Even the creek seemed quieter, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I waited, light sweeping across the tree line, my breath coming in short gasps that fogged in the cold air. Then I heard footsteps again, but this time they weren't trying to be stealthy. They were clear and deliberate, crunching across the leaves and twigs, coming from the trail entrance. Someone was walking into the clearing. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound, and my headlamp beam joined it. Both lights focused on the gap in the trees where the trail opened into the clearing. The footsteps continued. Closer. I could see the undergrowth, moving now. Branches shifting as something pushed through. My finger found the button on my flashlight, and I realised I was holding it like a weapon, ready to swing it at whatever emerged from the trees. The movement stopped just inside the tree line. I could see the silhouette of a figure, dark against the slightly less dark background of the forest. Human-shaped, about my height. "Who are you?" I said, and my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless, at the very edge of my light's reach. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape that might have been a person. I took a step forward, bringing my flashlight up higher to get a better angle. The figure took a step backward, maintaining the distance between us, staying just at the edge of visibility. I stopped. It stopped. "What do you want?" I said, louder this time. Silence. Then from right behind me, close enough that I should have felt breath on my neck. "What do you want?" I spun around, light sweeping, heart exploding in my chest. There was nothing there, nothing. but I'd heard it right behind me. I was sure of it, close enough to touch. When I turned back toward the trail entrance, the figure in the trees was gone. I backed up until I felt the heat of the fire behind me, and I stood there, turning in slow circles, trying to watch every direction at once. My hands were shaking so badly now that the flashlight beam was jerking around, making shadows jump and shift. That's when I realised something that made everything worse. If something could sound exactly like me, if it could reproduce my voice perfectly, then how did I know what I was hearing was real at all? How did I know the footsteps were real? How did I know the figure was real? How did I know I wasn't talking to myself? My thoughts were spiralling. I recognised the pattern, the way anxiety could take a strange situation and twist it into something paralysing. But this wasn't just anxiety. This was real. Something was happening. I forced myself to sit back down by the fire. I put more wood on, bigger pieces this time. I was going to keep this fire burning until dawn if it killed me. The flames were real. The warmth was real. I focused on those sensations, trying to anchor myself to something concrete. The voices continued throughout the night, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always my voice, sometimes repeating things I'd said, sometimes making sounds I'd never made, laughing, crying, screaming, all in my voice. Around what I guessed was 3 or 4 in the morning, I heard myself having a conversation. 2 versions of my voice talking to each other somewhere in the woods to the north. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught fragments. Shouldn't have come here. Too late now. Watching. Always watching. The conversation went on for several minutes, casual and unhurried, like 2 friends catching up, except both voices were mine. I put my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it. I started humming loudly, trying to drown it out, but that just made it worse, because then I was adding another version of my voice to the mix. Eventually, the conversation faded away, and the forest went quiet again, except for the creek. I don't know if I lost time or blacked out or what, but the next thing I was clearly aware of was the sky beginning to lighten, that pre-dawn greyness that comes before actual sunrise. The trees were becoming visible as shapes instead of just darkness. I'd made it to dawn. The fire had burned down to coals. I was so cold I couldn't feel my feet, and my back ached from sitting in the same position for hours. But it was getting light, and that meant I could pack up and leave. I moved quickly, mechanically, broke down my tent without caring about folding it properly, just stuffed it into its bag, grabbed my sleeping bag, my bare bag, from the tree, shoved everything into my backpack. My hands were clumsy from cold and exhaustion, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. The whole time, I kept expecting to hear the voices again, kept expecting something to come out of the trees, but the forest was silent. As the light grew stronger, it almost seemed normal again. Just trees, and a clearing, and a creek, like the night had been a bad dream, except I knew it hadn't been. I got my pack on, grabbed my flashlight and headlamp, even though I didn't need them anymore, and headed for the trail. I walked fast, almost jogging, my legs shaky from the adrenaline and lack of sleep. The trail looked different in the early morning light. The blue blazes were harder to see somehow, and I found myself second-guessing the path a few times. But I kept going, driven by the overwhelming need to get back to my car, to get out of the forest, to get to some place with people and noise and normalcy. I'd been hiking for maybe 20 minutes when I heard it one more time, my voice, distant, coming from somewhere off the trail to my right. "Don't come back," it said. Clear as day. Not a question, not a repeat. A statement. A warning. I didn't stop. I didn't respond. I just kept walking. Faster now. Not caring about the noise I was making, or the pain in my legs or anything except getting out. The rest of the hike is a blur. I know I fell at one point, scraped my hands on a rock. I know I got turned around once and had to backtrack to find a blue blaze. I know I was crying at some point, though I don't remember exactly when. But eventually, after what felt like hours, but was probably only one, I burst out of the tree line into the parking area. My car was still there, exactly where I'd left it. The only car in the lot. Proof that I'd been alone up there. That no one else had been camping nearby. No one who could have been fucking with me. I threw my pack in the trunk without securing it, got in the driver's seat, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine started, I almost sobbed with relief. I'd never been so happy to hear a mechanical sound. I drove too fast down that dirt road, didn't care about the potholes or the suspension. When I got to the paved highway, I pulled over at the first wide spot and just sat there, engine running, heater blasting, trying to stop shaking. I drove back to Portland in a daze, stopped at a Denny's somewhere near Trout Lake and forced myself to eat something, though I couldn't taste it. The waitress asked if I was okay, said I looked pale. I told her I was just tired from camping. When I got back to my apartment, it was just after noon on Saturday. I'd been gone less than 24 hours. It felt like a week. I took a shower, standing under water as hot as I could stand, trying to warm up even though I wasn't cold anymore. Then I got in bed and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, it was Sunday morning. For a moment, lying there in my bed with sunlight coming through the window and traffic sounds from the street, I managed to convince myself that it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination, that I'd been more mentally exhausted than I realised, that being alone in the woods had triggered something. Then I went to unpack my gear, and I found my phone in the outside pocket of my backpack. It had enough charge to turn on, and when I checked the recording app, I found something I didn't remember starting. A voice recording, time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. Friday night. I must have accidentally activated it somehow while I was scrambling around in my tent. I almost deleted it without listening. I didn't want to hear it, didn't want any evidence of that night to exist, but I needed to know. I needed to understand what had actually happened. I played the recording. For the first 30 seconds, it was just rustling sounds and my breathing. Then I heard myself call out, "Hello, do you need help?" Silence. Then, distant but clear on the recording, "Jay, over here." I kept listening, hearing the whole conversation play out again. Me calling, the voice responding, and on the recording, there was no mistaking it. The voice in the woods was my voice. Exactly my voice. But here's what made me stop breathing. Toward the end of the recording, around the time I was sitting by the fire, there's a section where I hear myself humming. I remember that moment. I was humming to myself, trying to stay calm. On the recording, you can hear my humming, but you can also hear, very faintly in the background, the same humming from the woods, the same melody, at the exact same time. I was humming and something in the woods was humming with me, not echoing me, not delayed, simultaneous. The recording ended about 15 minutes after that. Battery must have died. I tried to tell someone about it. I told my roommate from college over drinks the next week. He listened, made sympathetic noises, suggested maybe it was stress, or maybe some kind of rare medical thing like a stroke. He didn't say he thought I was crazy, but I could see it in his eyes. I tried posting about it anonymously on a camping forum, asking if anyone had experienced anything similar. Most responses suggested equipment failure, someone playing a prank, or sleep deprivation causing hallucinations. One person suggested infrasound, low-frequency sounds that can cause anxiety and hallucinations. Another mentioned something about geographical features causing weird echoes. None of it felt right. None of it explained what I'd experienced. I thought about going to the police or park rangers, but what would I say? That I heard voices in the woods, that something was imitating me. They'd think I was either crazy or high, and I'd probably end up getting a mental health evaluation. So I didn't tell anyone else. I kept it to myself, carried it around like a weight. The nightmares started about a month later. Always the same basic theme. I'm somewhere, a mall or my office or my apartment, and I hear my own voice calling to me from somewhere I can't see. Sometimes it's calling for help, sometimes it's just repeating everything I say, sometimes it's having entire conversations with itself. I always wake up before I find the source of the voice, wake up with my heart racing and my sheets soaked with sweat. I moved apartments 6 months after that trip. I told myself it was because I got a better job offer, which was true, but really it was because I couldn't stand being in that studio anymore. Too quiet, too isolated. I needed neighbours, needed to hear people through the walls, needed the constant reminder that I wasn't alone. I'm 33 now. It's been 6 years. I live with my fiancée in a house in the suburbs, and I've got a decent life. Good job, good relationship, good friends. Normal. But I think about that night all the time. Not every day anymore, but several times a week. Something will trigger it. I'll hear my voice on a voicemail, or I'll see something about camping on social media, or I'll just be lying in bed at night and it'll come back. I've done research. Hours and hours of research online, reading about everything from mental health conditions to paranormal phenomena to acoustic anomalies. I've read about doppelgangers and fetch spirits, about skinwalkers and mimics. I've read scientific papers about mass hysteria and auditory hallucinations and schizophrenia. I've looked up every rational explanation I can find. Nothing quite fits. Nothing explains the voice recording, the physical evidence that I didn't imagine it. The closest I've come to finding something similar was a single forum post from 2012 that I found buried in some obscure paranormal website. Someone describing an almost identical experience while camping alone in the Cascades. They heard their own voice calling to them from the woods, heard it getting closer throughout the night. The post ended with them saying they left at first light and never went back. I tried to contact the person who made the post, but the account was deleted. I don't know if they ever figured out what happened, or if they're still out there somewhere, carrying the same weight I am. I've thought about going back to that spot. Part of me thinks maybe I need to face it, to prove to myself that it was just a one-time thing, some weird set of circumstances that won't repeat. Maybe if I went back in daylight with other people, it would break the spell somehow. But I can't make myself do it. Every time I think about planning another camping trip, even somewhere completely different, I feel my chest tighten and my palms start to sweat. My fiancée has suggested camping a few times. Says she thinks I'd enjoy getting back into it, and I always make some excuse about being too busy or the weather being bad. I haven't told her about what happened. I'm afraid she'll look at me the same way my old roommate did, with that mixture of concern and skepticism. Or worse, that she'll believe me and be afraid of me, wondering if I'm mentally unstable. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was out there is still there, in those woods. If other campers have experienced the same thing, or if I was just unlucky enough to stumble into something that should have stayed hidden. I've checked local news from that area periodically, looking for reports of missing hikers or strange incidents, but I've never found anything definitive. There was one article about a solo hiker who went missing in the Gifford Pinchot area in 2020, about a year after my experience. They found his tent and his gear at a campsite near Dark Meadow, but he was never found. The article said his car was at the trailhead and there was no sign of struggle at the campsite. Just gone. I don't know if it's related. I don't want to know. What I do know is that something happened to me in those woods. Something that either science can't explain or that I don't have the knowledge to understand. Something that broke my sense of reality in a way I've never fully repaired. I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like the ravings of someone who had a psychotic break or took something they shouldn't have. I've had enough therapy to know how easily the mind can create false memories or misinterpret sensory input when under stress. But I have that voice recording. I've listened to it dozens of times, played it for an audio engineer friend who confirmed it wasn't edited or manipulated. The voice in the woods is real. It's on the recording. It exists. I just don't know what it is. To this day, I can't stand hearing recordings of my own voice. When I have to leave a voicemail or record something for work, I get this crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like something is listening, like something might call back to me in my own voice. And late at night, when the house is quiet and everyone else is asleep, I sometimes lie awake and listen very carefully to the silence, making sure I don't hear anything that sounds like me coming from anywhere it shouldn't. I never go camping anymore. I won't go on hikes that are more than a mile from a parking lot. I won't go into the woods alone, won't even walk through the wooded park near our house after dark. Because I'm terrified that if I do, I'll hear it again. My voice calling to me from somewhere I can't see, saying things I never said, knowing things I never told it. And this time, I might not make it out. I don't know what was in those woods. I don't know if it was something natural that we just don't understand yet, or something that shouldn't exist at all. I don't know if it was specific to that place, or if it could be anywhere, waiting for the right conditions or the right person. What I do know is that somewhere in the forests of Washington, there might be something that can perfectly mimic a human voice. Something that circles in the darkness and calls out in your own words, your own voice, your own intonation. Something that watches from just beyond where the light reaches. And I know that I heard myself out there in those woods. Multiple versions of myself, surrounding me, speaking to each other, warning me. Don't come back, it said. I won't. I promise I won't. But sometimes, in my nightmares, I'm back there anyway, standing in that clearing with my flashlight and my fear, and I hear my own voice coming from the darkness, saying things I don't remember thinking. And in those dreams I always wonder, what if that voice never left the woods? What if it's still out there, waiting? Not for me specifically, but for anyone who camps alone. Anyone who's far enough from civilization that no one would hear them scream. What if right now, this very moment, someone is sitting by a campfire in a remote clearing, congratulating themselves on getting away from it all? What if they're about to hear their own voice calling from the trees? I can't save them. I can't warn them. I can only tell my story and hope someone listens. Hope someone believes me enough to be careful, to think twice before camping alone in remote areas, to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. Because whatever is out there, it's patient, and it's waiting, and it knows exactly how to sound like you.